Good morning, everyone. And it's nice to see so many people here on March the 28th. I know it's busy time for everyone. It's the year end. So very nice that you found time in your busy schedules to show up and learn about looking for funding and proposal writing. So just a little note here at the start. Finding funding and writing proposals is a big topic, right? You could do at least a full day session on it. So just to manage expectations, this is an overview. So we're going to touch on different parts of that process. It's not going to be as detailed as it could be in a full day session, but hopefully it'll give you some good information and resources. Okay, so today we're going to talk about three parts of funding opportunities. So we'll talk about looking for funding opportunities. How do we find them? We'll talk about the funding application process. And then just a little bit about completing the work and preparing the reporting. So let's start with looking for funding opportunities. So in our world, in the First Nations environment, funding opportunities are always there. They always come out of different government departments, different nonprofits, and it's just a matter of how do we get that information? How do we know where to look for them? So sometimes we have a specific project we want to do for our organization. And then that kind of triggers us to look for funding. We may approach our government contacts, we may talk to our network and just see what funding is available. But what I find useful is to constantly monitor all the available funding opportunities, because really any funding opportunities brings resources to our community or our organization. So we learn something, we provide some services, and we also create employment. And so I find it's useful to be aware of what's out there and to consider those funding opportunities for our organization. Now, who should apply for funding? I feel that anyone that feels like they can or should be able to apply. If your organization has a person who's specifically designated for it, that's great. Many times we don't have a person who's specifically designated. So if you come across a funding opportunity and it seems like it's a good fit for your First Nation or your organization, my view is, what do we have to lose? Right? And for most of us, either in finance or program management positions or even an administration position, we know enough about our organization, about our First Nation to kind of suggest a project, to think about one that can fit into that funding opportunity and can provide resources and create employment for our First Nation. So I encourage you to start looking proactively for funding opportunities and applying if you already don't do that. And just remember, there is nothing to lose, because what's the worst? We applied for funds and we didn't get it. I have many opportunities where I wasn't sure I knew what I was doing when I applied for funds, and just because the subject of the project was a bit outside of my expertise, and I didn't feel like I want to involve consultants or experts at that point, just because they get paid anytime you involve them. And surprisingly, those projects got approved. And then at that point, we went and hired the experts and they did the work. But my point is, there is nothing to lose. Try applying, try using resources. If nothing else, you will learn something from that process every time. So how do we look for funding opportunities? ISC and CMHC send regular emails with funding opportunities. So establish a relationship with the FSO or whoever the contact for your program at ISC is, and also with your CMHC advisor, and let them know you're looking for funding opportunities. Sometimes those funding opportunities come to us from the leadership, sometimes from our contacts, but if we just become interested in it and make people aware, those opportunities will find us. Specific project funding. So if we're looking for funding for a specific project we'd like to do in our organization, we definitely want to reach out to ISC, to the FSO, and ask what's available. And normally, if they don't know, they have resources, they can ask other people or look in their system for available funding opportunities. Now, sometimes if nothing is readily available, we need to use some weight there, right? And we need to ask the leadership to meet with the RDG and potentially use some political connections. I always say if you have a big project and the funding isn't aligned, send your leadership on a trip to Ottawa. Let them meet with the politicians, let them express the need and request funding, and many times there'll be a positive decision or at least some opportunities. Tribal councils and chiefs organizations, they may have information regarding funding opportunities. So again, just let them know you're looking for them. Networking. You may know people at other organizations, other First Nations that would tell you we got funding for this. So definitely keep that networking up. Anytime you go to a conference, again, keep up that networking, meet different people, see what opportunities are available. And the simple online search, just the Google search, sometimes brings different opportunities we weren't aware of. So this slide is just a list of resources where we can see what's currently available as funding opportunities. This is not a complete list. I'm sure there is many other resources. This is just the one I've been using throughout the years, and I find it helpful. So the first one is ISC calls for proposals. Then we have CIRNAC, which is another organization, part of the federal government, that deals more with lands, economic development, and so on. But really, it's just like ISC, just a different department. Now, I've included here Manitoba Resource Library. So I know you're all in Ontario, and we did try to look for a similar resource in Ontario. Unfortunately, there isn't one. So the reason I included it here is because 90% of the funding in the resource is federal funding. So it's available across Canada. It's not specific to Manitoba. In fact, it's kind of difficult to find things that are specific for Manitoba there. It's all federal, pretty much. So it's a good resource, definitely to look through. Now, different government departments have their own funding programs and systems, application systems, right? So the one I've been using successfully for years is Canadian Heritage. So they have the arts and culture funding. There is the Building Communities Through Arts and Heritage, which is a great funding opportunity, annual funding opportunity for community events, such as powwows, sundances, any sort of cultural festivals. Justice Canada, so there is the Indigenous Justice Program. There is a very strong need in many communities for justice-related programs and funding. Unfortunately, at this point, Canada just has big plans. The funding that's available is quite limited, but it's good to check in once in a while. Now, Environment Canada, normally there is no ongoing programs, but they come out every year with projects which are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per First Nations, per organization. So you can check in regularly and see if anything is available. For some of these resources, you can actually subscribe. I'm pretty sure Justice Canada gives you that option. So you can subscribe to their newsletter and you'll receive all sorts of information. Some of it is not relevant, it's just their research, but some of it is just the funds and that they're coming out with. So it's, if you can subscribe, it's definitely a good idea. We have Women and Gender Equality, a WAGE. That's a pretty new department within the government. And they recently came out with a few proposals which were quite significant. So definitely worth checking. I'm not sure if anything is available right now, but the link is here. So I wanted to show some of those resources separately here. Just give me a second. Okay, so this is my first link. These are open proposals or calls for proposals for IFC. You just click on the link and it shows you what open calls for proposals are there. So you can click on anything and go further in any program that seems like it's applicable to your organization. And it's good to check this one once a month or a couple of months, because things come up that can be applicable to us. Okay, so my next one here has a bit of a web error, but it's pretty similar to ISC. So this is CERNAC funding. They'll have less calls for proposals, but they do come out. So it's good to just be in the habit of checking that. So they only have one program right now for northern contaminants. May or may not be applicable to your organization. Now here's the Manitoba Resource Library. And even though we're in Ontario, again, it's really good. It's a really good resource. So here we can go by category. Say we're going to say economic development. Okay. And let's see here. We're looking for, you'll see that here we can look for tools and information, some services, some training, or we can look for funding. So I'm selecting funding here. Search, and then it gives me different economic development opportunities, description, and links, how I can get there. You'll see that most of it is federal. I don't even see anything for Manitoba here. Federal or nonprofits. Something is Western Canada, that's fine. So definitely use this resource. It's a quick way to see what's available. The next one I wanted to share is the Canadian Heritage one. So they list all the programs, all the funding programs that they have available. Again, building communities through arts and heritage is great for any local festivals you have. It's a recurrent program. You just have to really watch the deadlines because you have to apply early for next year's festival, but it doesn't take you long. Once you complete first year's application, you just roll it forward every year. It's right within their system, it's web-based, and you can keep applying for your powwow or any other community events. The funding that they give you normally depends on how many other organizations apply, because they have a pool of money and they have to divide it equally. So we almost never get as much as we apply for. I would say normally we get half. So one of my communities will apply for about $1,000 in powwow funding. It's a big powwow, and we get around 50 to 60. But definitely a great resource, right? Okay, so this is the page of resources, and the presentation will be on the website, so you can use that for your search for funding ongoing and in the future. Okay, so I have a separate slide here for economic development. funding opportunities, just because it's such an important issue for most First Nations and different organizations, right, which is trying to do more economic development. And I just really wanted to emphasize the availability here of this Community Opportunity Readiness Program, or CORP. So what that does, it will cover up to 80% of the cost of valuation and a business plan for a new business you want to start or buy at the community. So now when we say 80%, really, if the community is already covering leadership travel and meeting costs and whatnot, then this can cover 100% of your professional fees, right? Because my total cost for, say, even a business plan or evaluation is going to include some leadership meetings, some, you know, oversight, some travel, right? So if the community is already paying for it, again, you can build your proposal in a way where CORP funds 100% of the professional fees for business plans and valuations. So the application form is very simple. It's like a 2-pager. There is some stuff in there that can be, you know, it's not, maybe not easy to understand some lines, so just keep it. Like all you have to do is put the stuff that you know in there, and if the funder needs additional information, they'll get back to you. Now, CORP is a program that is ongoing, so you don't have to wait for any deadlines to apply for valuation, business plan, kind of business feasibility analysis funding. And that funding normally comes through very quickly because it's a local kind of resource. That funding is up to $250,000 per project, and they can locally decide to give it to you. So I've never had a case where they didn't give money for it. Okay, so that's the part where you do valuation or business plan, which is the first step in applying for more funding for buying a business or starting a new one. So now when that is done, that first step is done, the next step is to make a decision. And if we decide, okay, this is a good economic development opportunity, now we need to find funding to buy that business or invest in it, right? And so the same program, CORP, in the next step of your application can provide up to 30% or $1 million grant for buying a business, okay? So whichever is lower, the 30% of $1 million, they can provide that grant. So, well, one can say, what's 30% for buying a business, right? That is just a little part, small part of the cost, right? Well, really the idea is that most banks would lend you up to 80% of the cost of purchasing the business based on your valuation and business plan. So as a part of buying that business, you want to talk to lenders like the banks, arrange a loan, and then the equity portion that the First Nation or your organization has to put in, that can be covered by CORP. Now with CORP, the equity portion, they have meetings twice a year. So you have to make it for one of those. And you may want to contact them in advance and kind of figure out when you should strive for, what's the date. And it is on, it's a competitive process. So they review many projects and then they rank them, depending how much money is in the pool. And then they decide who they're going to give the money to. If your First Nation has never applied for CORP or has not applied for a long time, you have a really good chance of getting that funding. And obviously the project needs to be strong. It needs to show good viability, but it's good. It's a good one to use. Then there is Indigenous Business Development. So that's a smaller grant of up to $100,000. It's mainly applicable for small projects or for individual people starting a business. Then there is Ontario Indigenous Economic Development. So Ontario is doing a lot of work on encouraging Indigenous economic development. It doesn't seem like currently they have programs available. They say they're open for applications, but the deadline shows is March 7th. So what I would suggest is just check in on that page and maybe contact them to see what's available if you have an economic development project in mind. Okay, so then another thing I wanted to talk about is ongoing programs to apply for annually. Again, there are many ongoing programs your organization is already applying for. I'm just bringing up some of them here that I apply for annually. So Professional Institutional Development Program, or PIDP, it's an ISC program. It's professional development for staff and leadership. It has to be for ISC funded programs. So if you have somebody working in economic development and on-source revenue, or even CMHC, they don't want to pay for it, right? And it also has to be kind of overall. If you just say we want to do something specific for income assistance department or for education, they don't like that either. So it kind of has to be, okay, we're training all our finance people, we're training all the leadership. One thing to keep in mind, they don't like repetitive projects. So we said we're training chief and council on financial literacy this year, and maybe we're sending them to a conference. Next year we have to come up with something different. They won't find the same thing. It's right in the program guidelines. Okay, but definitely it's an annual thing. The form is a one-pager. It takes you half an hour to apply if you have a project in mind. And it's totally worth it, because what's the worst? They don't approve you one year, well, they'll approve it next year. They kind of try to give equal treatment to different First Nations. So if they don't have enough money in the pool and you haven't applied in a long time, they'll give you priority for your professional institutional development. So that's an annual thing to look into. And again, it can be training your finance people, it can be training your admin people, it can be training chief and council and program managers. So you can just work with it, different groups every year, different purposes. Canadian Heritage Local Festivals, so we talked about that one. Easy to apply, good to get funding for your community events. Then there is a Family Violence Prevention Program. It's a smaller program, but again, an annual application. Once you do it 1 year, it's easy to carry forward next year. And you have links here with program websites and guidelines. Okay, so we talked about what we do for fines and opportunities. And we talked about how we have nothing to lose if we have an opportunity and it seems like it's a good fit for our community and we have a project in mind. But let's talk about the application process now. So again, we have ongoing programs versus project-based or one-time calls for proposal. If we have an ongoing program in our community applied in the past, so maybe we've applied in the past for another organization, that becomes easier, right? Because we can use previous proposals. We already know enough about the program. It is just a more straightforward kind of application process. Project-based, this is where the community gets together, or the leadership or program has an idea. Maybe we need to build a center for the youth, right? And then here, we don't know what funding is available, so we have to start looking for funding and then learning about programs that we find. And then there is the one-time calls for proposals. So all these resources we went through would come up with certain calls for proposals, which are just a one-time thing. During COVID, they had COVID-related things. Sometimes there's a pilot project for environment or for gender equality. We can apply for those. And so with those, what's going to be important is to really understand well the program guidelines, because it's nothing we've applied for before, and it's also not for a specific project. So if we have a specific project in mind, we kind of know what we want to do, right? Everything else is just putting together details. Well, if we come up with a one-time call for proposals, it's not like we were necessarily looking to do this, but once we see it, we're like, oh, that's actually a great fit for our community. It's a great fit maybe for our youth or elders, right? And then in this case, we really want to understand the program guidelines, what's eligible, what are the eligible projects, eligible activities, eligible costs, and if it is a good fit for our community. Okay, so program guidelines, that's an important element. That is your constitution, this is the law, right? So we really have to study it well. Now, we don't have to study it well as soon as we see it. If we see a proposal, we can't come across a proposal, we may first want to see if the concept is a good fit, right? Do we have the desire to do an environmental project right now or gender equality project? Maybe we don't. We want to see what the funding is, like how much funding is available, and you know, what's the deadline? Do we have the capacity to apply? Maybe we become aware of it a week before the deadline and there's just no capacity this time, right? Or maybe the funding is reasonably small. We're not experts in the area. So for us to put together a proposal, it's too much effort for the funding that we may get, right? So we definitely, at the start, we just scheme the guidelines for the important indicators and kind of say, okay, then we do want to apply, we may want to apply, or maybe we don't. This is not for us, not this time. Further in the process, of course, we really have to learn the details in the program guidelines so that our application is successful. So funding, purpose, and objectives. Again, this is going to decide whether it's a good fit for our community or our organization. And they kind of normally have separate objectives. So there is the overall purpose, like say gender equality, and then there's separate project objectives, right? Program objectives, which would say to promote equality for women under age of 25, or to promote, you know, two-spirited equality, right? And those objectives become really important because the more of them we can work into our proposal, the stronger it is. What the funder wants to see is that we're really meeting those objectives. Now, if we're talking about an ongoing program, well, those objectives are kind of clear to us. We do it every year. We're not going to focus on it too much. If we're talking about project-based or one-time calls for proposal, it's important to really link the objectives into the proposal. So if they say they want to focus on men over 40 in a gender-based gender equality funding, well, we really want to make sure we emphasize how the proposal will address that gender and age category. Okay. So then maximum funding available. What's the total maximum funding available per community? Because again, if it's reasonable amount, which to me, it has to be more than $100,000 for me to put in an effort into a new proposal, then great. If the maximum funding available is maybe 20,000 and I can see that it's going to take me a week to work on a proposal, I'll think about it. Just because there's always other proposals, and if my time is going to be spent better on something that will provide greater value to my community, this is what I'm going to do. Maximum funding available contribution percentage. So always pay attention. Some of those proposals will come out and they'll say we'll cover up to 50% of the eligible cost. So the community needs to come up with the remaining 50%, right? Sometimes it's 80% that the government covers and we have to come up with 20. So pay attention to that, because they may be providing up to $1 million, but now we have to come up with another 50%, which is another $1 million, right? So it's important to understand that, just to see whether we do have the resources for that, because maybe we don't. One example is the Indigenous Justice Program. Every once in a while comes out with capital funding for law enforcement work. at the First Nation, but it only covers 50%. So if you have no resources allocated to build a building for your law enforcement, then 50% doesn't really do anything for us, right? Pay attention to the application deadline. Again, lots of these proposals, what happens is government aren't as good at marketing out their programs as Caitlin and Chantel here. They don't reach out as much. So they sit in it for a while and then they realize they don't have enough applications submitted. So then they start all of a sudden sending it to all the contacts, and sometimes you get an application and it's due in a week, right? So again, this is going to be a question, can you do it? Like, are you familiar enough with the subject? Do you have the time to do it? Definitely check out the application deadline and see if it's doable. Eligible costs and activities, very important, right? We may have something in mind, maybe a capital project, but the program is only funding operational expenses, not capital, or vice versa. So it's important to understand what qualifies. Now, why else it is important to understand is because if it's just the program we came across and we're considering it for our First Nation, then, well, how do we come up with a project that can work? Well, when you read through those eligible activities and eligible costs, it'll actually give you ideas of what you can do within your organization for that project. They normally also list ineligible costs and activities, which is really important to read as well, because it really clarifies what you cannot claim. Now, application forms. All of those programs will have either forms that you can download, so in PDF or some other format, or they can be web-based. Now, the web-based they're good to use because you know, they carry forward from year to year, and you kind of just do it all online. You don't have to save a bunch of documents. The issue with that is it's difficult to save a copy of your application. You may have to just print screen every time you move on to the next slide. Some of them would give you an option to print it all in the end, but definitely don't submit it until you printed it out somehow, because otherwise you don't have a copy of your application. So proposal would have two main components. There will be the write-up, the verbal write-up saying, this is the project, this is our plan, this is the activities we want to do, kind of a project description. And then that would include the project work plan in some way, shape, or form. And then there will be a budget, so financial component. So now that drives that, like, they drive each other. So if I have a work plan, my proposal description including a work plan would drive what my budget is. Because if I'm saying my activity is to hire a youth program coordinator, then obviously I'm going to have that program coordinator wages in my budget. So what I find very useful is once you have a concept in mind of a project, of a program you're going to do within your organization, just put it on paper or Excel spreadsheet or in any shape or form, just outline it. This is what we want to do. These are the activities and these are the resources that we will need. We'll need the project coordinator. We'll need maybe some support workers, some meeting space. It's going to be travel. Maybe it's going to be some honorariums for meetings, right? So outline all this. Once it's outlined, you conceptualize it better in your head. And that outline can be a formal work plan. Some programs would require a formal work plan. If they don't, still make your own. And it doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be very detailed because it's just a proposal stage. But that concept that you have in your head, put it on paper or on a spreadsheet and kind of say, okay, these are the main activities and these are the resources that will be required. And then your next step is how much will those resources cost? So now remember, this is just an estimate. Nobody is going to keep you accountable to the penny for those resources. So if you think a youth coordinator's wage is going to be $40,000, but it ends up being $50,000. For most proposals, it's kind of flexible. They just want to know ballpark. They just want to have the best estimate you have at the time. And again, once your application is accepted, it doesn't mean that the budget is set in stone. Normally, you have time to work through that budget, make it more detailed, and work with the program officer to kind of see what's going to work for your project. So even when your budget is final and you get a contribution agreement with the budget, normally there is a possibility to move costs somewhere around 25% between categories. So again, when you prepare that budget, don't worry about how accurate the number is. It doesn't have to be to $1 or to a cent. It's just a good estimate is good enough, because at the proposal submission stage, most of the time they just want to see the concept. They don't need to see something really exact. Many times, programs will require additional documents, such as letters of support or band council resolutions for supporting it, or other reasons, maybe some legal waivers, maybe some prior financial statement audits, and so on. Pay attention to that part, because if you don't submit everything they're looking for, it gives an easy reason to not fund your proposal. Most of the time, the programs are really good. So if you forgot to submit something, they'll reach out to you and say, hey, your proposal is in by the deadline, is great, but you're missing a letter of support. Can you submit it? But again, we just want to be careful and try and submit everything ahead of time. So, you know, if they have a lot of applications and they're just looking for a reason to drop some, then ours doesn't become the one they drop. Application completion checklist. Most programs nowadays, if they're pretty involved, like the application process, because for programs like professional institutional development, again, it's like a 1 or 2 pager, right? Even for CORP, for economic development, it's a 1 or 2 pager. You don't really need a completion checklist. But for more involved programs, they would have an application completion checklist, which it's advisable to go through and just to make sure that everything is submitted. Okay, so let's talk a little more in details about the funds and application process here. So we want to review program guidelines, including maximum funding available, eligible costs, and proposal submission deadline. And then we need to decide, are we interested in applying? Do we meet all the criteria? Is this project for us? Right, so now we decided, yeah, we're interested, could be good for our organization. Let's review eligible activities and costs. Does that work for us? Are there any ideas that we can get from reading those eligible activities? If we have our own ideas and it's not very clear whether they would be eligible, contact the program. There is at least an email contact, sometimes there is a phone contact. I like doing it in an email, just because the response you get back is in writing. So then, you know, for sure you have documentation for it, right? So if I have an idea that may or may not fit within a project, I'll just email the program and ask for their input. So, and that's what the next step says, contact funder with questions regarding eligible activities and costs. Most of them, if it's a new program, would offer a webinar about the program and application process. So consider if that would be useful. And even if you can't attend it, sometimes they have recordings of webinars, just like we do. So you can request one and watch it. Now, say we have a concept, we have a project idea, but for me, I'm in finance, right? And if I'm doing a project in, I don't know, environment or maybe supporting youth, I'm not necessarily an expert. So next step I'm going to do is to speak to staff that are experts in the area and also speak to the leadership, right? Because for any project I'm applying for, I need the leadership support. And so say if I'm doing a youth support, working on a youth support proposal, I'll talk to all the relevant program managers, maybe the education director, maybe Jordan's principal director, maybe even the health director, just because they do have programs that may be relevant to that, right? And just see what ideas they have. I'll definitely talk to chief and council. Now, I don't have to talk to all of them at once, right? But there is always somebody there who deals with certain matters more, right? So if I know it's a youth project and I know one council in particular is very passionate about that, I may just talk to her and say, look, there is this proposal here. Do you have any ideas of what we need? You know, can we do it? Is this a good idea? Most of the time the answer is yes, go for it, right? But they also come up with ideas and they go, listen, this is what the need is at the community. If you can put it into the proposal, that's great. Then we want to determine our capacity to do the work for the project. Can we do it all internally? Does our organization have the capacity? Do we need to hire more people? If the answer is yes, we need to hire more people, great. We just create an employment for our community and our organization and provide invaluable services. Now, do we need other experts or consultants? What do we need? An engineer, an environmental consultant, an HR consultant, right? It's possible because we're not experts in just about everything. Well, and if the answer is yes, then what stage do we need them at? Do we need them right now when we're writing the proposal? Or is proposal just for a general concept? And if it's approved, then we can hire the consultants and pay their fees, right? Or do we need them right away? And if we need them right away, do we have the resources to pay them? Because they don't work for free, right? To give you an example, one of my communities wanted to build a youth recreation center, and there was a proposal they were able to submit to the federal government, but between the engineers and the architects, the bills came up to $400,000 for the proposal. The proposal didn't get approved, but the First Nation was stuck with paying the bills, $400,000. Okay, I was really upset at that, but I mean, what are you going to do? They did the work, and it was not discussed initially that some of the work may be a contingency basis. They were told just do the work, right? So again, be very careful there. If we're engaging experts, then maybe we should have a discussion with them that some of the work is on contingency basis, that if project gets approved, then they get paid. If it doesn't get approved, then they get paid less or nothing, right? Depending on what they're going to agree to. Now, there is also experts or consultants that would write a proposal for you, right? So they're not necessarily your environmental experts or engineers, but all they do is write a proposal. My experience is you can do it internally, okay? Because when somebody writes a proposal for you, unless it's very specialized, they're not doing anything more than you would do. They're reading the proposal guidelines, they're making sure costs are eligible, they're making sure activities are eligible. If they don't understand something, they reach out to the government. When government or other organizations come out with calls for proposal, their idea is not to pay consultants. Their idea is to give as much funding as possible to the First Nations, and they're there to support you. Like the more applications they get, the more money they distribute, the more successful their program is. So my advice is, unless you absolutely have nobody who's willing to take that on, try applying from within the organization. You'll probably do as good of a job or better, just because only you know your organization well enough. And you know, all this write-up, how to show that we have a good project, they really went away from being sticky on that. As long as you complete the application form to the best of your ability, as long as you have a good project concept in mind that fits their criteria, it's going to work. And if they need more details, they'll contact you. They're very good at working directly with First Nations most of the time, or organizations. So definitely think about it, whether you want to pay somebody for preparing your proposal, because normally they take anywhere between 5 to 30% of the proposal value, right? And 5% only happens if it's a huge proposal, say capital funding. So now, if we're applying to a department with which we had previous projects, or maybe it's a recurring funding, right? Maybe it's like PIDP or family violence funding. We really want to make sure that our reporting for previous years is done. It's submitted, it's on time. Now, if it's not done, it's not submitted, it's not on time, that's okay too, as long as we communicate with the department and we tell them, look, we know we owe you the reporting for the last 2 years, we're working on it, you'll get it by this date, because it really does not support our new proposal, the fact that we didn't submit any reporting for the previous ones, right? So we can just communicate and explain there were delays, it's coming, and then we really want to meet the deadline that we set. So if we applied last year, then we want to review a copy of last year's proposal, see if it was successful, if we can make any improvements. And again, can we use the same activities, or do we have to come up with new ones? And it depends on the program. PID, the Professional Institution Development, you have to come up with new projects every year. Local festivals of Canadian heritage, you don't. You can use the same proposal over and over again, because it's the same, probably the same annual festival your community has. Okay, so again, if you need to involve experts or consultants, we can make them in charge of the funding application process. So say if it's heavily environmental and there is no way for me in finance to even have a good concept of a project, then I can engage environmental consultants at that point, negotiate the fee for proposal writing, and just let them lead the process. But I do want to review their work, because many times when they prepare the budget in particular, they don't consider certain things like the remoteness of the community. If I have a community up north, the travel is going to cost way more than a community, beside a major city or town. So I really like to review whatever they submit prior to the submission, and most of the time you'll find something that you can add to that or correct. So prepare a draft work plan or project outline. So we just want to list the project activities, required resources, and then to follow up, we'll add numbers, we'll add a budget beside those resources. So it's kind of a flow. It's just like when we did our budget webinars, I used a trip to Las Vegas as an example. Same here. You're planning a trip to Las Vegas, you know what you want to do. This day you're going to see a show. This day you're going to maybe walk on the strip and watch the fountains. Next day you're going to maybe take a trip to the desert, right? So you have those activities, and then next step, okay, how much is it going to cost me, right? What's the cost of the show? What's the cost of renting a car to go to the desert and things like that? Same thing with a proposal. Have it outlined, preferably on paper or in Excel, not just in your head, and then put the cost of each activity beside it, and then think about, okay, what am I not considering? So complete project application forms using the information from the work plan, and you can attach the work plan. Complete the budget using the template provided by the funder. Most of them would provide the budget template, or at least within the application form, you'll have a section where it has budget. So you'll have different lines with different costs and details. What other documents are required? So again, don't forget letters of support, BCRs, waivers, and so on. Most funding applications can be signed by anyone. So if I'm preparing it, I can, and I know I can sign an application on behalf of the community, I can, but I normally choose to get the leaders to sign, just because it shows leadership support, it just strengthens the application. So if you can get the chief to sign, it's always a good idea, or maybe a quorum of council, or even a couple of councilors. After we submit application, we definitely want to print the confirmation. It's just the finance person thing in me. I want everything documented. And then watch for funds and approval letters or emails. Sometimes they send an approval letter, sometimes they send a letter saying, sorry, you weren't approved, which again is fine. We learn from the process and we can use it next time. If we don't get a response, we want to follow up in 2 to 3 months, depending on the project. Normally they'll give us a timeline of when approvals will come out. But if there's no timeline, or if no approval, if we get no communication by the timeline, we just shoot an email, write an email to whatever we use to apply for the program, or what they provided as a part of their application package, and ask them, okay, where's it at? When will you come out with decisions, or what's the status for my organization? After funding is approved, they'll work on a contribution agreement. So again, it can be very simple for a professional development program. They'll just send you an amended contribution, like an amendment to your contribution agreement. Chief and council will sign, and it's done. For some of the more involved program, they'll actually contact you and work with you on more detailed budget to include in the contribution agreement. So you'll have another opportunity to work on that work plan and budget. Okay, so here are some funding application tips for the budget. I like to apply for the maximum funding available. Okay, just because if they want to give less, they'll make that decision and they'll give less. But there's always a chance that they'll give everything, right? The maximum available. Every line item in the budget, if possible, I'll provide details of how I calculated it. And this is just because it gives more strength to the proposal. It shows that I didn't just come up with a number. I mean, some of the numbers are pretty easy. If it's just somebody's wage, it's an ongoing rate for that position. But some of the numbers, you may want to provide details if you can, because it just makes it look better, makes it look stronger. And then for admin costs, most programs would suggest a percentage of your overall funds and application. So they would say admin cost is 15%. Definitely use what they suggest. You don't want to be over, and there's no point in being under, okay? Because they're good with that 15%. Okay, so let's talk about completing project work and reporting, because obviously receiving funding is great, but if we don't complete the work and don't report, they'll claw it back most of the time. So for any project we do want to appoint a program coordinator. So even if, say, our health department say, well, we'll work on it. If there is no person responsible for that particular project, it may not go so well, right? You always want the program coordinator, and most projects, most funding opportunities would allow for that in there. And so that program coordinator will manage the project and will also prepare the activity reporting. So they may not necessarily work on the financial part because they're kind of a program manager. Finance staff or yourself, if you've applied for a project, may need to do the financial reporting part, which again, it's not complex, right? For the financial reporting part, you'll just start a new department or a new class within your system, and all the expenses and funding related project are going to go in there. Your accounts, your categories for expenses, ideally would be the same as in the budget that was approved for the project. And then these are your actual numbers, and your final reports, financial reports, and will normally be just comparing the approved budget to the actual numbers and explain the differences. But I'm in finance, and even if I wrote the proposal and kind of helped shape it, I can't do activity reporting for that most of the time. And so that program coordinator needs to be able to report on activities. The funding officer is normally in contact with us regarding the required reporting, and they provide report templates. So we just use their templates to do the reporting. If there are project delays, activity delays, or reporting delays, we want to communicate it as soon as possible, because again, the funder has an option to claw back funding, right, or not to release the next funding installment. And also it's a relationship thing. If we know that we're going to be working with that department in the future, maybe we do want to create a relationship where we keep them in the loop and involved in what's going on. If we have to carry over funding, most of the time it's okay, and we just need to make sure we communicate it as soon as possible. If a project requires a financial audit, there is normally two options. They either want a separate audit for the project. So say I have a project ongoing for a couple of years, and then the funder wants an audit for it in the end, or they're okay with me just having a schedule in my organization's audit, just a schedule, a separate project schedule in the annual audit for my organization. Recently, in the recent years, they've been okay just taking a schedule, because if you need a separate audit, that costs way more. You have to hire auditors just specifically for that project. If they do insist on a separate audit, they will normally fund the cost. But then for us, it's way more scrutiny. So if auditors are going to come and review costs and support documents for the project, we have to be really diligent with keeping that documentation in order. So our best interest is to convince them that we can just provide a schedule within our annual audit, just like for other programs. And most of the time they say, yeah, that's okay. Okay, I see that I'm already at the end of the time here. We didn't get to look at any examples, just because this is an overview for an hour. But hopefully you do have enough resources here to start looking at. And again, most of these forms are pretty easy to follow, and if you don't know something on the form, you can contact the funder, or you can just leave it blank and let them get back to you. Okay, I just want to encourage you to look for funding and try applying, regardless of what your experience is, because we don't get expertise in something without doing it over and over again. Even if we apply for something and it doesn't get approved for the first few times, that's okay. We'll learn every single time, and then hopefully it becomes successful.